Well, as you can tell, it's raining. You know, I'm in Scotland, so what do you expect? And if you look over here, that's the Wallace Memorial. You know, William Wallace, Braveheart, all that stuff. Because we're at Stirling Castle. And, you know, you may well have thought about visiting Scotland and going to see Edinburgh Castle and all that, but this is really where the history of Scotland is. Because over there you have the Battle of Stirling Bridge that you can see from here. Somewhere down there, there's the river, the Burn. Yes, that's right. The Wallace Monument. And somewhere down there you had the Battle of the Stirling Bridge, where William Wallace fought against Edward Longshanks and showed him what for. And not too far away from here you have the Battle of Bannockburn, where, who's this guy here? I suspect it's Robert the Bruce. Yes, Robert the Bruce beat Edward Longshanks' son. That's right, King Robert the Bruce. What more can you ask for? Of course, Robert the Bruce, his father was born in Writtle, Essex, and there is some dispute over where old Robert was born, whether he was born in Scotland or also in Writtle, just round the corner from where I live down there. So it could have been an Essex boy. Anyway, this is Stirling Castle, the centre of, well, the centre of the whole idea of the Scots nation. And of course this is my car. But we're going into the castle. Of course, the thing about Robert the Bruce's statues, they always have a bird sitting on his head. It's not necessarily the same bird. They just like to sit there. Now, I don't know who this geezer is. All right. The Battalion Princess Louisa's, the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. 1899 to 1902, South African War. Yes, Scots and the British Empire. Now, what you're going to see when we go inside is, well, medieval, then Renaissance, and then Reformation. This was the castles which all the Jameses lived. The Stewarts, or the Stewards, as they originally were called. And then just a little bit of history about Bannockburn and Robert the Bruce. Bruce took over from the Balliols. In fact, the John Balliol, who should have been king, well, rather decided that he'd rather stay on his lands in France and not bother, because it was all too murderous living here in Scotland. The kings tended to kill each other all the time. They're a murderous bunch. And old Robert Bruce, he decided to take it over. It wasn't necessarily a good idea, mind you, because it ended up with practically all his family being tortured to death and in horrible ways, and his wife hung in a cage over the side of a castle in England. Didn't really do her temperament much good either. It was all rather painful, but if it wasn't for him, perhaps Scotland would have become a province. Mind you, we're talking about Scotland, we're really talking about various feudal lords vying for position, vying for land, for the right to exploit their serfs. And of course, over in the Isles, which we've just been in, you had the Lord of the Isles, and he was rather keen on back in the old dynasty, so they were fighting against Robert the Bruce, and of course the Irish and so on, and Robert the Bruce had to have a go at them. So it was all a bit of a mess, really. But it ended up with the Stuarts eventually taking over from that line. And they were also a Norman family. How the Normans came up here is all a rather complicated story in itself. They were kind of invited in rather than fought their way in. And it's created a rather interesting connection with France. The Old Alliance, as they called it.
Perhaps slightly ironic. You did rest the place, but then you can't deny who left the mark. But as a result of this matter, and many others besides, the earliest work of Stirling Castle
What we have here, this is the medieval hall, and this was built by James IV, I do believe. And here you have the Renaissance, built by James V. James V unfortunately got sidetracked by the French, who demanded that he go and attack the British, I say, the English, and he didn't really want to because he was quite friendly with Henry VIII's son, but he did and got himself killed, and Mary Queen of Scots took over. I say took over, she was about 3 years old, I do believe. Now then, I think this is the Reformation period, and by James VI, who of course became James I of England. That's how we had a united kingdom. He also became James I of Britain, because he started to try and unify the countries, Ireland, England and Scotland. And he started the Kingdom of Britain, trying to, but of course the Stuarts were well, they became rather problematical, because by the time James's son Charles I took over, what happened is that the attempt to unify the churches of Scotland and England resulted in rebellion in Scotland and the beginnings of the English Civil War, which didn't end well for Charles. James V kept lines here. He was a a king that everybody liked, actually. He was a rather educated man. But unfortunately, didn't do him any good. I think this is where Mary Queen of Scots lived.
Named because this, of course, is where she normally provides you with her presence. It's part of the duties of the kings and queens of Scotland to give themselves and their ear to the people who request them. Doesn't matter how important a person you are, everyone has the right to speak with their monarch, although you may have to wait quite some time. But because, of course, she is the Queen, she has other obligations too, and unfortunately you will see that she is not providing her presence today. But it does give you the opportunity to take in some of the finery. The chamber here is often visited by, well, nobles, lords and ladies, even foreign ambassadors. So the furnishings really ought to be impressive enough that they may see them as at least on par with their own nations. And, well, most of the items here have not come from Scotland either. They have been sourced from far and wide to speak of the wealth and the connections that our nation has. For instance, the tapestries, the Hunt of the Unicorn, the originals are woven in Flanders, the home of the finest tapestries in the world at this time. And the carpets too, we know them as Turkey rugs, often not seen on the floor. The Queen has been quite extravagant here. These are hand woven and transported through Europe via Turkey, but of course they come from places like Pakistan and Afghanistan. Great works of art, cost thousands of pounds, but the Queen can obviously afford to replace it, should she need to. Most folk hang them on their walls or place them on tables to protect them, but not all of us have the fortunes of a kingdom. Now, you will see as well that adorning the walls we have some of these wondrous grotesques, the Renaissance fashion that is made most popular in France and Italy. They are, of course, showing foliage and creatures. They are romanticized versions of some of the Roman decorations that have been discovered in the grottos beneath the city of Rome. And of course we have it in French on the walls there, Vive le Roi, as well as the Latin, the language of God, Vanitas Vanitatum et Omnia Vanitas. But for those of you, like me, who are not permitted to be educated, these words may be lost on you. And so there is another language, the language of symbolism, which is all around us. Another way of conveying a great deal of information, if you know where to look. Now, I will welcome you to ask questions if you have them. For instance, the tapestries have several layers of stories involved in them. But as I'm sure you are short of time, I do not mean to keep you. You're welcome to keep exploring. But otherwise, just speak with me. I promise I won't bite. If you feel anything, it's probably reflex.
Okay, sorry, that was really interesting, but I'd love to know more about the unicorn. Why is the unicorn so dominant here?
Well, in truth, it is because this is a restoration. If you were in the 16th century, around all of Europe, you would see many depictions of unicorns. The tapestries themselves, as I say, woven in Flanders, they are one of several sets of unicorn tapestries that were commissioned and purchased by people all around Europe at the time. But here in Scotland, it's significant because it plays its part in our coat of arms. So the kings and queens, the Stewarts, they use the red lion rampant as their official coat of arms, their family symbolism. The creature on its side, the unicorn, supporting it is known as the supporter. So he holds it aloft to show that he has come to, again, give his power, his support to it. Now, the reason why the unicorn is so popular everywhere, being a creature with this white hide, represents his purity. And of course, the mythical stories that surround him too, these can only be explained by the fact that God himself must have created the unicorn and placed him on earth. Now, some of the stories suggest that the unicorn cannot be captured against his will. The only way to win him to you is if he recognizes something good, virtuous, and honorable about you. So, when he comes to the lion rampant and lifts it up, You notice the chain that wraps from the crown around his body is never affixed to anything here in Scotland. Because if we were to fix it down, of course, we would be trying to trap him or tame him, and this would convince him to break his bonds and to leave us. So instead, he has come willingly because he recognised something within the Stewarts that he sees as being honourable and virtuous. Because he is a messenger of God on earth, it is like saying to everyone that God himself supports our monarchy, they're divine. Do not question their authority. But I will point out another part of the myth. The only animal that the lion is naturally afraid of, the unicorn. And so, although there is a message here for the common folk, there's a message for the kings and queens too. If you do not act in a way that God would see as fitting, the unicorn can just as easily lay down your coat of arms and abandon you. You see all this information just for the picture of the unicorn.
I think that's fascinating because we do forget, we don't know these stories, whereas the people at the time hopefully would understand what that meant. But we don't.
Well, as I say, because there isn't a form of education for everybody, for the lower classes, the language of symbols, it is something that you spend a great deal of time learning, and heraldry in particular is very important. Because in times of war, of course, this is the information that you need to figure out whose side you're on, where your specific troop or garrison is.
So then the griffin on the right?
Well, because the rooms are designed for Marie de Guise, the wife of the king, here you have a marriage crest, so two households coming together. So I've explained the king's half. The other half then is for Marie de Guise of Lorraine. Now, her uncle was the Duke of Lorraine, and was a very powerful man indeed. And part of his coat of arms is this eagle, or this falcon. Now, it's not always clear exactly what the story behind the falcon is. There is a suggestion that the de Guise family rely on the symbolism of another mythical creature called the Illyrion. And the idea of the Illyrion is that there are only ever two alive at any one time. And they fly around the world and search for one another. And when they meet, they mate. And they lay two eggs. But because there can only ever be two alive at any time, in order for those eggs to hatch, the parents must first sacrifice themselves. One will fly to the sun and the other will plunge into the oceans, and this allows their children to hatch and come forth. So the symbolism would suggest that in order to be a good ruler, a good protector, you are like the parent of your nation, and you must sacrifice yourself for their future. But of course, slightly more commonly, and because many people use eagles, it is a little suggestion that even from the lofty heights in the sky above, when the eagle is nothing more than a tiny pinprick to us, he sees everything. So mind what you do, for you will always be observed. Very well. Thank you.
I was say, did Mary Queen of Scots use this area as well? Because she was a child then?
Because she is a child.
Yeah.
So she has nursery quarters, which are in the rooms upstairs. So these are all very public rooms. Some of them are made to look a little bit more private, the bedchamber next door, for instance, but they're official chambers. So the kings and the queens, they had more personal private spaces upstairs, which are free from the prying eye of the public. So Mary's nursery quarters were there. Now, it is said that she would break her fast with her mother in the bedchamber next door, but otherwise she was kept far away from all of the comings and goings of the royal court. When she is older, she actually inherits the half of the palace that had been designed for the monarch of Scotland, so for her father. So she's the first monarch to use those rooms as they were intended. Because up until that point, Marie de Guise refused to allow anybody access to those chambers. This is partly because when she did get here, she found that the regent of Scotland, the Earl of Arran, had made themselves very comfortable in those rooms. And her husband, of course, had not long since died. And they were part of his greatest ambition. So to see someone else use them when her own husband had not was quite offensive.
Yeah.
So Mary does spend time here, but more so in the far chambers when she's an adult.
All right. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions.
And the lion. So the unicorn is the protector. Yes, this room. Can't let any doubt, are you, as to whose room this is?
Oh, that's right. Ah. These were all carved recently as well. The originals are, I think, in the museum in Edinburgh. Yes, they were up when they were up there before restoration. They had no colour on them. They'd lost all their paints on, so it's quite fun that they've painted them.
Look, Laura, it's magic. You don't need to clean.
Oh, right.
Just around to look at what you're doing. Apparently a lot of the originals are upstairs.
Hmm. Ah, right. Yeah.
Going to be a Stirling head.
Mm.
We're all Stirling heads. Derek, would you stand over there and look over here? Then we've got a 4C. No, you're supposed to stand there. So
Oh,
just look in the mirror. There we go. We're all in.
Actually win through the game, even if your opponent had more points than you. It's a rather exciting thing.
It's a great game.
But I will let my master of the household here tell you a wee bit more. But I've already spoken of the football, and I've just come to that point in tennis. Perhaps you could tell them.
Thank you very much.
Forgive me.
Thank you very much.
You said that was ambassador upstairs.
Will indeed, sir.
So yeah, it is a quite a sporting household, as we say. You would have learned about all this football in the world right here in Stirling Castle. And the tennis, of course, did we get to the tennis bats? Well, I don't need to tell you nothing then. So, golf. You can come a wee bit closer, folks. It's free of charge. I'm not trying to sell any of this stuff. Not at the moment, anyway. So, it's quite a sporting household. Just saying the oldest football in the world. Where are you folks from?
England.
England, right. So it's a football, not a soccer ball. So, oldest football in the world, found in the Queen's bedchamber. Just when you come through there with all that beautiful silk and stuff. But golf, of course, a real passion of mine. This is golf. This is an amazing game. Two different types of golf balls, or as we say in Scots, golf. Where are you folks from? Oh well, you say golf as well then. Fantastic. Can't get any better than I've played Carnoustie. It wasn't supposed to, but I did. So this is we say in Scots golf, and although we claim the game of golf, we gave the world golf. The reason we say golf is in the Scots language. It probably comes from the Dutch word or Flemish word half. They don't call it golf; they say half. So we say golf. And until just recently, there was only one golf club left in the world, and it's near my hometown of Kilmarnock in Ayrshire. But I only found out when I was bragging in the middle of summer, back in July, end of July. I was telling everybody there's only one golf club in the world, and the man spared my blushes, but he did come up at the end and said, we now have two golf clubs in the world. It's over in Banff in Canada. A Scotsman has just built another golf course, GOWF, golf, but we say golf in the Scots language. And we know that James IV was a golfer, we know that James III. Football and golf were banned several times because people weren't going to church on a Sunday. People were actually going and having a good time on a Sunday. They worked 6 days a week, they weren't going to church, couldn't be bothered, so the church got on to the royal family. People not coming to church on a Sunday, they're all going about, getting drunk, quite basically they're having a good time, and they should be coming to the church, so they were banned several times. But of course, it didn't stop the royals playing golf either. So these are copies of thank you, these are copies of your original type of golf balls. This is a cheaper version, which is just a carved wooden ball. So very disposable, you know. And even in the 16th century, we were environmentally friendly, so that breaks and just leave it, just rots there. But this here, these were expensive. This is what we call a feathery. This is a feathery. So this is actually completely stuffed with chopped up bird's feathers, and everything's done very, very wet, of course, which when it's wet, it expands, and once it dries, it tightens up. So inside there, we've got pieces of cork, and then rawhide over the top, and you can see the way they're stitched there. And once they dry, it expands and goes into this nice, perfect wee circle there. So that's the original golf ball, the feathery. And when, a way back 100 odd years ago, when they were looking at the new development of golf balls, the gutta percha ones, the rubber ones, they realised, you know, by putting dimples on the modern golf ball, you see all these dimples, that's for aerodynamics, believe it or not. And they took it from the old 19th century featheries, which were covered in wee tiny balls, and they realised it was actually more aerodynamic with these wee holes in them, so they flew over them. And these are just copies of the type of clubs that we'd have. This over here, a lot of people think this is cricket. No, cricket is just not my thing at all. I don't understand it. I don't even understand why people enjoy it. I'm terribly narrow-minded when it comes to cricket. But this is, believe it or not, the women would play, the washerwomen would play a game that would resemble rounders or baseball or cricket today. This is actually for cleaning the washing, believe it or not. This is what we call in Scots a beetle. We call this a beetle. I don't know what you'd call it down in England, but this is for beetling the washing. And while the washing's drying, just like the game of badminton, originally called birdie, comes out of the washerwoman. Now we don't know where it was first, whether it came from Europe or whether it was just a thing people did in general, but it's not a cricket bat, it's for cleaning the washing there. It's cleaning the washing. And over the other side, of course, gambling. It's considered a sport, not really, but it's just a pastime, and it's a what we call house of fortune. And if you have any questions at all, folks, just, if there's anything you're curious about, just ask. Or stand in silence and stare at me.
How'd you play it?
Oh, this is fantastic. I'm glad you asked. Okay. so get your money out. Get your money out. Come on. Right, okay. So we'll do. You guys want to play? Come on, up we come. So what we'll do is we're going to divide the coins up, right? So if you don't mind, just give your hands on these spray, okay? Just so we can all. Right, you're going to play as well then?
Yeah, I'm good.
Right, okay, right. You only use one hand.
Finest example.
Of course, one of the ironies of this place is that after Robert the Bruce beat the British, I keep saying that, beat the English, he decided to knock down Stirling Castle. So he did a lot of damage, but apparently his grandson, Robert II, who was the first Stewart king, rebuilt it, or at least built that bit. So I guess he must have done a bit more. Ah, right. Now I know where I am. This is Reformation. It's built on the same dimensions as Solomon's Temple, as mentioned in the King James Bible. So this is King James the First of England, 6th of Scotland. And he put that up. And here we are in the medieval hall. This is supposedly built on the same dimensions as the Temple of Solomon.
This is the Chapel Royal.
Yes, Temple of Solomon dimensions, as mentioned in King James's own Bible. Well, it's the one that commissioned it. The guy who actually wrote most of it was hung, drawn, quartered and burnt at the stake, etc., for his efforts. Yes.
By the next king?
No, by previous one. He was doing it during Queen Mary's reign, I think.
But you said King James the Sixth.
Yes, that's right. But they.
It.
That's right, but they used that as the basis because he did the first translation. Right. The name of which I can't remember right this moment. Yeah. Anyway, if you take a look at this chapel, you'll see it's not exactly a Catholic church. It's a Reformed Catholic church. James VI was a Protestant. So, but it was early Protestant, so to speak, in England, and they weren't quite as abstemious as the later Puritans. But that didn't stop John Knox and his mob taking over later on. And of course, Charles I of England lost his head, despite saying he was a Calvinist, which was all rather odd. But here you are, one of the earliest manifestations of a royal Protestant church. Okay, try and remember this. James the First of Scotland. He was killed at some battle or other. James the Second. He was killed at some battle or other. James the Third. Well, he was killed at another battle by James the Fourth, his son, which was, one of those things. James the Fourth. Well, he unfortunately died in another battle, or was he murdered? And James V came to the throne, like a lot of the Jameses, at a very young age. But of course, you know, others, like their mothers and other nobles, took over, and then they had to fight them to get their power. And of course, by the time James V came in, I think James V grabbed his throne when he was about 14 or 15, largely by murderous means. And James V, well, he did well. He married a French woman who died, so he married another French woman. In fact, he married the daughter of the King of France, and the second time he married another French woman, and so became an ally of the French, ended up in a battle with Henry VIII, and, well, was so depressed by the whole experience, because some of his children already died, and he lost the battle, so it's thought he committed suicide. I do believe that James IV was accidentally blown up by a cannon. Or was that James III? I think that might be James III. He was accidentally blown up by a cannon. And where are I? James V. Don't they say Lucky Jim? Obviously not that lucky. James V was so depressed to commit suicide, probably. And then James VI, well, he finally got lucky, and